All right, so let's get right into it. We tend to think about space in one of two ways. Either it's this final frontier for peaceful science or it's a potential battlefield. But what if both are happening right now at the same time and they're being driven by the exact same competitive forces? Well, a recent interview with a NASA administrator paints this really fascinating picture of a two-front space race, and we're going to break down what that actually means for the future. This one quote from the source, wow, it just perfectly captures the entire issue, doesn't it? It's not just about exploration anymore. It's about having a strategic advantage. And that one idea, that space is the ultimate high ground, is shaping literally everything, from military strategy way up in Earth's orbit, all the way to our ambitious plans to go back to the moon. So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why space is even considered this ultimate high ground. Then we'll dive into the military's pretty radical new strategy up there. After that, we're going to pivot to the civilian side of things, the mission to return to the moon, and walk through the timeline for the Artemis program. And finally, we'll tie it all together and see how it fits into this new geopolitical space race. Okay, first things first, let's unpack this core idea of duality. How can the very same place be a laboratory for humanity's biggest scientific dreams and, at the exact same time, be a critical arena for national security? Yeah, the source is super clear about this. On one hand, you've got NASA, whose whole mission is the peaceful pursuit of science and discovery. But operating in that exact same domain is the U.S. military, which sees space as absolutely essential for national defense. So you have two very different missions in one shared and increasingly crowded space. And this is exactly where the Space Force comes in. The source mentions its creation under President Trump, and it has one single purpose: protect American assets and interests up in orbit. Its members are even called Guardians, and their whole job is basically to stand watch over this high ground while NASA is out there pushing the frontiers of exploration. So what are they actually guarding? Well, mainly satellites. And these things perform two functions that are, and I'm not exaggerating, the bedrock of modern military power. First is observation, giving early warning of missile launches and providing critical targeting data. And second is communication, that indispensable network for command and control that connects forces all over the globe. Seriously, without it, a modern military is pretty much blind and silent. Now, protecting those assets is forcing a huge strategic shift, a move away from the old, kind of vulnerable models. Let's take a look at what this new strategy is all about. What's so interesting here is the contrast. The old way of doing things was to build one gigantic, multi-billion-dollar satellite to do a job. The problem with that, it's a single high-value target, basically an Achilles heel floating in orbit. The new approach is a total 180. Launch huge constellations of smaller, cheaper satellites. Think of it like a resilient swarm instead of one big, fragile giant. According to the source, this new strategy gives the U.S. a unique edge because it spreads out the capability, making the whole network incredibly hard to take down. Instead of one single point of failure, you have hundreds. Taking out one little satellite does almost nothing. This whole approach, in the words of the source, creates all sorts of problems for our adversaries. It just makes it so much harder to deny the U.S. its strategic advantage on that ultimate high ground. But look, this military strategy to secure low Earth orbit, it's only half the story. At the very same time, a totally different kind of race is heating up on the civilian front, and it's expanding this competition to a whole new destination. And that brings us to the Artemis program. The source describes this as the first really significant push to get astronauts back on the moon since the Apollo missions of the Kennedy era. The interview also points out this program was kicked off during the Trump administration, so it signals a real renewed national commitment to lunar exploration. The next big step, Artemis II, really shows the international cooperation that's involved here. The crew for this groundbreaking mission has 3 American astronauts and, this is important, 1 astronaut from Canada. It's a sign that this isn't just a solo mission, but a collaborative effort to tackle a huge challenge. And the power, the sheer power behind this mission is just staggering. The rocket that's going to launch the Artemis II crew will generate 8.8 million pounds of thrust. To put that in perspective, that's like the power of more than 30 fully loaded jumbo jets, all taking off at the exact same moment. It's an unbelievable amount of force. And the journey itself is just as ambitious. The crew is going to travel on a path that could take them 250,000 miles away from Earth. That's 1,000 times farther than the International Space Station orbits us. It's farther than any human has ever been. This isn't just a trip. It's really pushing the absolute boundaries of exploration.
So how is this all going to play out? Well, the plan isn't a single moonshot. It's a very deliberate, step-by-step process to reestablish a human presence on the moon.
The timeline here lays out a really clear path. First up is Artemis II. That's a 10-day test flight where the crew will orbit the moon to make sure all the spacecraft systems work perfectly. Then, according to the source, in 2027, there's a mission to test out the actual lunar landers. And if all that goes to plan, it leads to the main event in 2028, American astronauts landing and walking on the moon once again.
Okay, so this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Neither the military strategy in orbit nor the mission to the moon is happening in a vacuum. They are both fronts in a much, much larger global competition.
And this slide just perfectly illustrates the core idea of this whole explainer. The US is facing a two-front space race. You've got intense competition in the military domain to control the high ground around Earth, and at the same time, you have this parallel race among nations to be the next to plant a flag on the moon. This quote from the interview just sums it all up perfectly. It explicitly says that NASA has competitors trying to beat them back to the moon, while the national security folks have competitors trying to threaten US capabilities in orbit. It's the same race, just being fought on two different fields. And the source doesn't leave this competition as some abstract idea. It specifically names a key adversary, China. And this is so crucial, because China is competing on both of these fronts. The technologies you need for deep space exploration often have dual-use applications. And, establishing a presence on the moon could offer strategic advantages we're only just beginning to think about. It really frames this new space race as a direct geopolitical rivalry with incredibly high stakes. So we're left with this really powerful question. We're watching peaceful exploration and military posturing just accelerate side by side, driven by the same competitive spirit. As these two fronts, one in orbit, one on the moon, keep advancing, you just have to wonder what the future of that ultimate high ground is really going to become.